Welcome to the Phillip Wylie Show. Take a look behind the curtain of professional hacking and hear compelling discussions with guests from diverse backgrounds who share a common curiosity and passion for challenges and their job. And now, here's your host, offensive security professional, educator, mentor, and author, Phillip Wylie.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Phillip Wylie Show. Today I'm joined by Jorge Reyes. We got the opportunity to meet at New York Cybersecurity Summit back in November, which is a pleasant surprise. One of my favorite things is meeting my LinkedIn and social media connections in person. So we had a really great conversation and, was kind of talking to him then and wanted to get him on the show. So we got it all scheduled out, and so here he is. So welcome to the show, Jorge.
Thank you, Phillip. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So it's just really kind of cool hearing your story when we're talking at the conference. And as I kind of mentioned before we started, some of my listeners and viewers are people that are trying to break into cybersecurity or move into other areas. So these stories, a lot of times, are very motivational for them and encouraging to those listeners. And so I'm based on what I heard about your story, I'm sure you're going to have some really good content to share with our audience.
Yeah, of course. Everyone has their own story, and I enjoy helping others in getting into the cybersecurity field and from my path, sharing all the things I've learned along the way. So I'm really happy to be here and be able to share what I've learned along the way.
That's awesome. And that's one of the best ways to learn because, when you have to learn all these things on your own, there's some things that we do learn on our own, but the time you can save others by sharing your experience. I mean, and it doesn't have to be a mentoring session. It could be just sharing a story and just kind of the way you do things, kind of resonates differently with each person, but it can save people a lot of time than trying to figure this all out on their own because, as well as I do, cloud, cybersecurity, AI, and all this stuff is so complicated. And if you haven't worked in the area, don't know anything about it, it's going to take a ton of research. You can end up down the path of information that's not really good, solid information. So there's a lot to unpack. And so having that information is helpful.
Exactly. I would say first, the things I've learned have been through trial and error. So a lot of error. And you do learn a lot, and it is important to make these mistakes. But in me being able to share what those errors have been and to show what maybe better paths, better ways to spend your time would be to whoever my audience would be. It is really important for me to save them the time that I had to spend on figuring what those errors were. And also what I found was, so I act as a manager of security architecture, but also on the side, I am an adjunct professor. So in my role as an adjunct professor, I would teach students, and also really why I took on that role has been to mentor them and get them involved in security, get them a lot of projects in front of them that they might not otherwise be privy to. What I found was in teaching students, many of them were missing very key skills that I found in the field that are necessary. Many of them were missing maybe, let's say, Python and cloud skills and just practical security skills, maybe even using Kali Linux. So that's what I've used that opportunity for in introducing them to labs and content that they, in traditional educational settings, they wouldn't otherwise get access to.
Yeah, there's a lot of cases in traditional education settings, they miss out on some of those things. Before we get too far into conversation, if you wouldn't mind sharing your hacker origin story.
Sure. Yeah, so where I started was so actually my undergrad was in atmospheric sciences, so it wasn't even related to tech really, although many of the courses that I enjoyed were programming in C and programming in Java, and also in Fortran because it was fairly back in the day. And also we're dealing with like legacy systems when we're talking about atmospheric sciences, and the weather models and things like that. So when I was looking for career opportunities, there unfortunately weren't any. And this is the thing that I try to share with many of my students where they really shouldn't make the mistake of avoiding internships. It was my understanding at the time, and many in my class, that as long as you get that undergrad degree, then you are basically handed a job, and that's not really the case. Like you need that experience. There's that catch-22 where in order to get a entry-level job, you need experience. So that's where I was. And for my next step, what I did was I thought about, okay, well, if I can't get a job with the undergrad degree that I have, how about I go to a master's program in something equivalent, something in the same domain that I want to get into career-wise. Um, and so, since I was interested in those programming courses, I went into information systems, and my focus was cybersecurity, so information assurance, because that was up and coming at the time, and also it was something I was really passionate about in a lot of the labs that I'd done on my own, building my own computer and figuring out how to secure it and how to build my home network and all these things. What I kept going into was security. So that's how I chose my master's major. And in my master's, I was very fortunate to get an internship at HBO. As an intern at HBO, I was fortunate to have a small team. And this is something that would come up in everyone's career, where there are pros and cons to certain situations that you're in, and you just have to focus on what those positives are. So for me, it was having a small team at HBO, and that allowed me to then focus on many different projects simultaneously, and to really be an owner of those projects and of many systems. So picked up a lot of experience, worked my way up to security engineer, into cloud security, and then from there went over to Grubhub, and made that transition mostly because I wanted to differentiate myself into cloud security and product security. And also there was an acquisition at the time. There's a lot of uncertainty there. So at Grubhub, worked a lot on vulnerability management, really built out a good core program at Grubhub. Went on to many other projects, like installing EDR agents onto our cloud fleet, and then into runtime security with bot protections for the mobile and web apps. And then I came to a point where I wanted to figure out what I want to do next in my career. What I decided on was I wanted to have, um, I'd like to offer my advice in multiple different areas. And so I thought, let me go for a more senior role, one that I could touch on even more projects. And so I landed here at Yext, first as cloud security engineer, but also now as a manager of security architecture. So that's been managing a team that we implement security by design for our infrastructure, and also deploy agents and tools across our endpoints, and also responding to security incidents. So it's a lot, but it's what I've wanted. I really enjoy the opportunity, the challenges that come with owning many different facets of a security program.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. That's really cool to hear where you're at in your career and where you started. So do you feel like that you got value out of using some of those legacy systems? Because you mentioned going through school, learning Fortran and all this, and nowadays, we're in such a cloud centric world. Do you feel like you got value from those legacy systems?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing that I learned was that there's always an easier way of doing something. So if you go back to and people would hate me for saying this, but more legacy coding languages such as C, not even C++, but just regular C. There's so many nuances that you have to account for, initiating variables and buffer overflows and handling memory within your code, that once you get to something like Python, it's just built in, and it's just much easier to write something up on the fly versus having to think it out. So that's something I've learned, where there's always an easier way to handle something. A lot of what I've learned also has been that things could and a lot of times should be automated. So especially when there are things that are repetitive, that you should look for ways in which you could automate things to remove what a lot of times occurs, which is human error.
Yeah, very cool. It's interesting to hear that, because a lot of times people nowadays don't get that experience with the legacy technologies, and some people like myself that start out in IT with some older technologies got to you know start out that way and then see the evolution in cloud. It's really interesting to see. see how it's gone. So, what got you interested in teaching?
So honestly, I tell this story and people don't believe me, but this is actually the truth. So I realized that in order to grow and build myself up, what I had to focus on was my communication. And the most natural thing was at the time to join Toastmasters Club, which is an organization in which you would go and then practice in front of the stage of other colleagues and get a random topic. You have to speak on that random topic in front of them. And I thought, I'll try this out. It should be easy, just going up and talking to people. But I very quickly found that to be very frightening, going in front of us, going on a stage and talking in front of people about which president would have which type of dog, just blind mind at that point. So I thought, okay, I cannot embarrass myself in that way. I have to find a different way of practicing my communication skills. So what I found was, how about I take on some sort of role in teaching students? So at first it was looking at TA roles and teaching assistant roles. But what I found was, especially since I had a master's and had experience at that point, the colleges that I was cold calling asked me, well, how about you teach instead of TAing? We don't have TA positions, but we have teaching positions that you would be able to fill. So I got into teaching, and uh, what I found was it's very fulfilling. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and a lot of time I would spend preparing for the courses and preparing the slides and making sure that they align with the previous week's slide, and I'm not and I'm building on information and not being too repetitive, and maybe partly myself where I get very, very detail oriented sometimes. But there was a lot of time that I spent in curating those slides, but also in curating the labs and making sure that I'm testing out the lab environments and building them where they would be able to complete the labs within like a certain time frame of 45 minutes and not a minute over, not a minute less, and um, very time consuming. So a lot of time was spent in preparing those labs and the course materials. I'm sorry, I'm getting some flashbacks and I forgot where your question was.
Yeah, I was just kind of asking kind of what led you into teaching.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
basically it was wanting to work on my communication skills. So actually the reason why I brought up labs was because of the mentorship that I did want to instill in that I want to partake on with those students. So in teaching, I was able to have real conversations with students that wanted to get into security, students that maybe are partly interested in security or curious about security. And me having gone through a transition from not even knowing what cybersecurity was, just hearing about it, and then going into a master's program and just really focusing solely on getting to that internship stage. It was really fulfilling to me to be able to meet with those students and to put information in front of them that would help them in their careers. I've had students reach out to me afterwards that would thank me for just things that I thought at the time maybe wouldn't matter so much, but they're using them in their roles now. In one thing that I do with my students is, and some of them don't like me for this, and other ones really see the value in this, is part of their exams are verbal exams because I found that I would learn the material, but then when it got to an interview phase, and then a lot of the interviews would ask you, so what is Diffie-Hellman? And I would have to explain that and try to think back to my class that I learned about Diffie-Hellman and try to process that and communicate that over to sometimes someone who maybe even isn't technical, and that's essentially what they're trying to test you on. Are you able to explain something complicated to someone who's not technical at times? So them having experience in explaining the concepts that they're learning in class did help them. I've had students that have come up to me afterwards and told me that the exams, even though they were a little grueling at times, they did help them with building that resilience that they would be able to use in those interviews.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. That's a unique thing that I haven't really heard anyone else talk about. But yeah, like those interviews and you don't know how to explain it or you haven't had the practice explain it. So that's pretty great that you're doing that.
Yeah, thank you.
So is how is teaching helped you like in your day-to-day job? Does this seem to help you in your management role because you're managing people? Does this seem to help you with mentoring your team and upskilling them?
Yeah, it's helped me with knowing that everyone has a story. All of my direct reports, they have career aspirations. No one is stagnant. Everyone is trying to grow. So that it's helped me in consciously realizing that. And so in managing, making myself available, supporting them in their career growth and understanding what their interests are and maybe what projects I should put in front of them, picking up where they may be accepting work but not actually wanting to take on that work and coming to and being communicative in the way that I would be able to be supportive and say, well, if this is not the right project for you, let me know. There are other projects in the pipeline that I could hand over to you and things in that way. The other way that it's helped me has been in those verbal exams. You get to pick up really easily when someone is maybe just repeating information that is in a certain question, let's say, and maybe doesn't understand the material. And obviously, I have a lot of sympathy for my students, and I help guide them to the right answer and try to extract information that's like deeply embedded in their minds. But where that's helped me is in communicating with vendors a lot of times and finding out where there are issues where maybe they haven't thought of certain edge cases and finding out where they might be not so transparent in some ways. So it has helped me in many areas within my organization and also externally, I found.
Yeah, that's a very good point about the with vendors and stuff because sometimes you see vendors and they know the sales pitch, but they really don't know the details of it. So that's really a great idea for be able to know, get an idea of what they know, and maybe a case where you need to go to someone else more experienced within the company to get more details because maybe they're not able to answer the questions you have.
Exactly. And you really want to avoid getting so deep into some product, maybe even implementing it, and then finding out that they're actually unable to deliver on a certain area that you had heard that maybe they were able to deliver on. And not saying that that happens so often. I'm really blessed with many of the vendors that we have, but it does happen, especially with sales pitches where you speak with them and they present themselves as a certain product, but then if you dig into it, it's not always the case.
Yeah, one of the things that was interesting too, just hearing your management style and how you kind of you're helping people and just kind of that background you have. Does that seem to impact your retention of your employees?
I would like to say so. I would hope so. I haven't had issues with retention so far, knock on wood. I I think it's helped me in understanding where my employees' interests are, and then being able to focus on those interests and just by you addressing their interests and helping them work towards their career growth, etc. Really resonates. I mean, you probably have had managers that you've enjoyed having, right? And managers that you perhaps to a lesser extent did. And many times it was the managers that you enjoyed having were ones that invested in you, that invested in your career growth. And so I try to recreate that with my employees. And so being conscious of where their interests are, and also knowing how to correctly bring up areas in their development that they should focus on is really important. So no one likes to be told that they did something incorrectly. No one likes to know that they architected something and missed some secure design principle. Maybe they stood up a S3 bucket and it wasn't encrypted, but then there's a policy that dictates that it should have been encrypted or that's mislabeled, mistagged, um, and then we have to do like a blameless postmortem for a certain situation. So you as a manager really have to think to how do we fix this issue so it doesn't reoccur, and of course, hold that person accountable to it. But to present it in a way where you are not castigating them. Um, it's more of a growth opportunity for them. And a lot of times that comes to you yourself as a manager accepting that you and I guess this reminds me of this book of I forget the name, but it's a former person in the military who led many operations overseas, and he believes in the leader having absolute control over an operation, over a project. And so anything that may go wrong in the project, that's ultimately the leader's responsibility, because the leader should have anticipated that something would have gone wrong in that area, that maybe there was a connection that they didn't put together ahead of time. Extreme Leadership, that's the book. And so I try to use that in um, in putting myself in front of blame that someone on my team may take on for a certain mistake. I try to put myself in front of that so that you are shielding them from blame, that ultimately I'm responsible because I didn't train appropriately this person in some situation. And also you get respect many times from that employee, because um, you are accepting responsibility that they might have been very, very scared to. The other thing about that is, because you are willing to take on the responsibility of whatever error, they are more likely to reach out to you if there are errors that they have committed later on, versus let me sweep this under the rug because I don't want to get in trouble for it. So it's more of, let's figure this out, let's fix this, versus them trying to hide something, which could ultimately cause larger issues later on.
Yeah, I really like that. That's great advice, and also too, you're just kind of showing through example to accept your mistakes, and that's good that you're teaching them that that is acceptable to be able to admit to their mistakes. So that's awesome. So yeah, it's pretty interesting to hear your background and just kind of how you came up. But for anyone that's just getting in, trying to get into cybersecurity, what are some recommendations you have for them as far as learning types of skills that are must-have skills that would kind of help separate them from everyone else?
Sure. So I have a blog post that's exactly on this, how to get into cybersecurity from my experiences and from what I've learned along the way. What I start with is to learn the material. So you have to understand the material, and also to know if this is something that you want to do. Many times people want to get into security just because they heard that maybe it pays well or something. But you have to realize that, first of all, not everyone's a hacker. Not everyone is compliance. Not everyone is blue team. There are many different domains within security, and within those domains, even many different roles. And so understanding which roles work for you, given your personality, given what your interests are, what resonates with you. And then from there, okay, what tools then should I be learning? What concepts should I be learning? And getting hands-on experience with that. So starting a home lab, for example, if you're wanting to become a security engineer, is really important, because you gain maybe Linux experience, command shell experience, which are really important in these roles. Learning Python is very important. Um, Essentially building upon the experience that you have. I have in my blog essentially a pyramid that I built. So starting with foundational things, and then, such as just operating systems and frameworks, etc. And then working above that to scripting, and then above that to DevOps and cloud concepts, and taking on those labs. So it's, first of all, important to build on your experience and your knowledge, but also to continuously learn. One of the things that I mentioned is that it's really easy in this domain, in this field, to get burnt out. You're expected to be an expert in everything, and that's difficult. That's really difficult. So it's important to be conscious of things that you want to learn, that you want to work in, but to also be really conscious of being honest with yourself on what you could take on. What I'd like to do is build like a 2 to 5 year plan, and where do I want to be in 2 to 5 years? Okay, let's say someone wants to become a CISO in 5 years, assuming that they're a little farther in their roles. in the security field. But in order to do that, you have to um, take on executive communication. So, okay, how do I do that? How do I practice that? How do I learn that? So adding in maybe workshops and adding in networking that you have to do into that path that you're building out for yourself. And then obviously in knowing how to design a security program. Um, okay, so you need hands-on experience. So how do you do that building a security program? Well, to do that, then you may have to understand the security concepts. Maybe you have to get a CISSP or something, which helps. That's essentially what the training, that certification is intended for. And then just working yourself backwards from your end goal over to where you are right now. That's what I like to do, and that's what I try to tell people to do, because what that does is, and this has helped me out countless times, it makes something that's unachievable now much more palatable, much more achievable, because you're focused on smaller chunks of smaller milestones that you're trying to achieve that will eventually point you towards that end goal that you're trying to get to. Obviously, the path will take you in different directions, and you have to update this constantly. But in having that mind map, it gives you confidence in you being in the right path for getting to the end goal. So that's something that I really recommend that people do more often. I find that if you don't have that, you tend to be in your opportunities and wait for them to come to you, versus having that map for your career in which you are creating opportunities for yourself, and you're being a little bit more active and proactive in gaining those experiences and putting yourself in the position of where you want to get to.
That's great advice. I like the way you do that planning. It's something that we could all learn from. We're getting down towards the end of the episode. Is there anything you'd like to discuss or share before we close it out?
Sure. I would say, so anyone interested in security, getting into security, or growing their field, growing their position in the field, do not discount the value of networking. It's the primary thing, I would say. And, people say this constantly, but it's the reality. It's a lot of times the connections that you make in the industry that would help you with finding your next opportunity. It's helped me land many opportunities. It's helped countless others land their opportunities. Also, don't wait for opportunities to come to you. Go ahead and learn AI, how to deploy your own AI models on your own home server. Build that home server from scratch. Don't just buy it. Learn the ins and outs so that you can learn the hardware, and then from there, private cloud, and then from there, obviously public cloud, and etc. Just constantly be curious. Don't stay comfortable. The other thing that I would say would be obviously to find where your interests are, but also to be flexible. You never know if there are things that might come up, that maybe something in a different domain that you haven't had experience with, but there was an opportunity that maybe you had missed because you don't have experience in that domain, which is a lot of times why I try to be very diverse in the projects that I take on. I've done everything from security operations to product security. First of all, because it interests me to be wide ranging, and it fascinates me, all of security. But also allows me to be an advisor in many different projects. So I recommend people to be active and to ask for opportunities. Many times, especially if your managers have your best interest in mind, they are willing to pull strings to give you experience in certain areas that maybe are not directly tied to your primary job duties. And yeah, try to be more selective with your experiences. Essentially, don't wait for things to come to you.
Yeah, that's great advice, because if you take your career passively, you only accept certain things, and that's just life in general too. I've kind of noticed that just things outside of work, just things in personal life, you just passively float along and just take what comes to you. It's kind of hard to blame anyone but yourself if you're not taking an active part in it.
I mean, I'll give you an example of, for example, when I was at HBO, I managed the vulnerability management program there, and it was presented to me. I was asked, "Do you want to take this on?" And I said, "Sure." Um, from school experience with vulnerabilities, but they're more conceptual. But having that hands-on experience with that project really taught me a lot. to when I got to my next role, I was able to use that to build out the vulnerability management program there. A lot of the lessons learned that I learned at my previous role, I was able to apply at the next one. So be open to learning new things, to not get siloed in specific areas because they many times open doors.
Very good. So appreciate you taking time to join me today. It was great to get to chat again, and good to hear about your story and hear your advice. You had some really great advice that I'm sure that the listeners are going to get a lot of value from.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure talking to you, Phillip.
Thank you. And for listeners, we'll have Jorge's social media info on there, and get that link to that blog he was talking about, that blog post that sounds like valuable information. So we'll make sure to get a link to that so we can share that in the show notes.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the Phillip Wylie Show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. In the meantime, to learn more about Phillip, go to thehackermaker.com and connect with him on LinkedIn and Twitter @Phillip Wylie. Until next time.